17th, 2024, and you are tuned into the Joseph Benamy Show for that date. I'd planned on spending some time, perhaps the entire hour, talking about Joe Biden, President of the United States, and his obvious diminished mental and physical condition tonight. And, there was only one thing that could possibly have bumped this developing, ongoing story off the proverbial front pages, and that would be if somebody took a shot at his opponent, Donald Trump. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So I can't spend the whole evening talking about the turmoil in the U.S. Democratic camp, because we have to talk. We have to talk about what happened in outside the town of Butler, Pennsylvania, on Saturday evening, when President Trump, and I use the term President Trump for those of you who are not American, and like me, I'm Canadian, but in the United States, the last title that you had, the highest title that you had in public service, in government, it remains your honorific for life. So if you've been the President of the United States, you are still President Trump. You may not be the sitting president, you may be a former president, but your title is still President. So, and that's why I refer to him as President Trump rather than Mr. Trump. I'm a little surprised when I hear American commentators referring to Donald Trump as Mr. I'm surprised when I hear commentators in the United States referring to Joe Biden as Mr. It's President. These guys have earned the title. They've worked hard for it. And whether you agree with them or not, they are entitled to the respect of the office. And so even though I'm not an American, and I don't feel particularly bound by these idiosyncratic rules, still, I think that it's only appropriate to refer to Donald Trump as President Trump and Joe Biden as President Biden rather than Mr. All right, so Saturday, this past Saturday, somebody, a young man, by all accounts, 20 years old, takes a shot at Donald Trump. And the circumstances surrounding this particular assassination attempt have led to many, many legitimate questions. Now, you know me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And by the way, conspiracy is not a bad word. It's not meant to undermine or discredit anybody. A conspiracy is an organized plot involving more than one person. So when we use the term conspiracy theorist, it means that I simply am not one of those people that looks at current events and goes, oh, that was planned. There's a whole group of people in the background planning this. So that's what I mean when I'm not I'm not a conspiracy theorist. That said, ladies and gentlemen, there are some very troubling questions and legitimate questions that are being asked right now of the security services in the United States, particularly the Secret Service. The Secret Service, again, for those of you who don't know, especially if you are outside of the United States, is the agency that is responsible, among some other things, it's responsible for the protection of the President of the United States, members of the cabinet, and other members of the government. So that's what the Secret Service does. It does other things as well. We're not going to get into that. But the Secret Service is the agency in the United States responsible for protecting the president, protecting those who are running for office as well, although the sitting president of the United States has to sign off on that. More on that in a minute. So the questions that are swirling around right now that we have not seen or received, I think, satisfactory answers to. The big one is, how is it that this 20-year-old with an AR-15 rifle. I believe that was the weapon that he was carrying, as well as other paraphernalia, a sighting scope, a rangefinder, all of the things that you would use. Frankly, you would use them for hunting, I suppose, but you would use them if you were a sniper as well. So, because that's really what hunting from a distance is, isn't it? It's really sniping. So here's this 20-year-old wandering around. He's got this paraphernalia. He's apparently acting suspicious around the entrance to the rally site, which would have been guarded by various law enforcement agents. And there would have been, and my understanding is that there was, or there were, metal detectors. So you had to go through a search to get onto the site. And clearly, here's somebody who doesn't have a handgun that's sitting around in, his pocket. He's wandering around with a rifle. Okay, so he's not getting through the checkpoints. He's acting suspicious, but nobody questions him or anything like that. All right, failure number one. Failure number two. He wanders over to this building, which is, I'm led to believe, 130 or so meters from where President Trump is going to be speaking, from the podium. And somehow or other, and this, I'm not sure how this is possible, somehow or other he finds a way to get up on the roof of that building. Now here's where the big questions start. How is it that this person was able to get up on this building with a clear line of sight, a clear shot at Donald Trump, so close? 130 or 140 yards doesn't sound very close, but in shooting terms, it's pretty darn close. And in any event, okay, how is it that he gets up there? Now, I've heard some people say, well, he climbed a ladder. And I've heard other people say, well, there was no ladder. So that's a question that needs to be answered. How did he get up there? How did he get up there unobserved? Number one, by law enforcement. Now, of course, it turns out he was observed. And if it wasn't just he was observed by law enforcement, he was certainly observed climbing up onto that roof and scurrying across the roof by witnesses in the audience and witnesses who were outside of the perimeter who were hanging around outside of where the rally was taking place. And some of these witnesses were interviewed on television, and they are saying that they tried to inform law enforcement. Now, whether or not that actually they were successful in doing that, good question. Because here's another question. Apparently, somebody did. Law enforcement officer, what agency, I don't know, did come across this young man on the roof or climbing up on the roof or whatever. Again, the story is very murky. We're not getting the full story yet. Either this young man pointed the gun at this law enforcement officer or whatever, but he withdrew. Now, is that apocryphal? Did that actually happen? I don't know. Okay, we're going to have to wait for some of the details to come out as to exactly what went on. But if it did, in fact, happen, then why was there not a central communications system or protocol where all he would have to do is reach for his radio and say, shooter on the roof, gun on the roof, or whatever? And that would have immediately alerted and should have triggered, no pun intended, a certain response by the Secret Service or law enforcement or whatever. And that apparently did not happen. Well, no, it not apparently didn't happen. It didn't happen. So again, why is there no central communication protocol? Or was there and nobody actually made a call? I don't know. But what I do know is that roof should not have been left open. Now, apparently, the head of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, has said two things. First of all, she's saying the building was secured or monitored by law enforcement personnel who were in the building. Now, that's a ridiculous thing to say, because just because you have law enforcement in the building, if in fact that's the case, that's not securing the roof. How do you make sure that nobody's climbing up on the roof if you're sitting inside the building? So that doesn't make sense. But what makes even less sense is the argument that she gave, the justification, the reason why she said that there was no law enforcement stationed on that roof in the first place. And one wonders, again, is she referring to Secret Service personnel or whatever? I don't know. But her explanation was that the roof was sloped, and therefore there was some sort of a security or a safety concern for whoever might be up there. Now, I've seen pictures, as I'm sure you have, of that roof, and there's no way that anyone can make a legitimate claim that there was a safety concern there. It's not that sloped. So why Ms. Cheadle would be saying this, and this just raises a question. I cannot imagine any universe where she has not seen photographs of the crime scene. I just can't imagine that. So, does she not have any common sense? Or is there, or was there, really some sort of a conspiracy here? Now, I'm not making an allegation that there is, or that there was. I'm just saying that these questions are legitimate questions, and some of the ridiculous answers to some of the questions so far, because let's face it, there's an investigation going on, there's going to be an inquiry, and we are going to get answers to questions. Some of these questions can't be answered yet. We don't have all of the details yet. So I'm perfectly happy to be patient. But, and here's the big but, if you're going to be patient, then if you're going to say, well, we have to wait until we have all of the details put together, and then we're going to have an inquiry, we're going to ask the right questions, we're going to be completely transparent, you'll have all of the facts in front of you moving forward. That's a fair position to take. And if that's the position that you're taking as the government, if that's the position that Kimberly Cheadle, as the head of the Secret Service, is taking, then take it. Meaning, don't give me, after telling me we have to wait until we have all of the facts, and then we'll lay it all out. There will be an inquiry. You tell me all of these things, and then on some silly, almost irrelevant answer you give me on the sloped roof. Why was nobody stationed on that building when it's clearly a building that you should have had somebody stationed on? And then in the normal course of events, you would have someone placed on that building. Why did not happen? Now, she could have said, I don't know. Because, look, she's the head of the Secret Service. She doesn't know all of the details of what's going on in every operation. I'm afraid probably including a presidential address or a presidential election address by one of the candidates. Nobody's briefing her into all of the details. There are people on the ground that are running the show, okay? So it would be perfectly legitimate for her to say, good question, I don't know. We're going to have to wait until we get all of the facts, do our investigation, and then we're going to have answers to those questions. She could have said that, but instead what does she say? She says the most asinine, stupid, blatantly false thing that she could, which does nothing but throw fuel on the fire of any so-called conspiracy theory that might be out there right now. Just for just for saying that about the safety issue around the slope on that building, this woman probably deserves to be fired. Just for that. Just for that. Okay, we're going to have to go for our first break of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. And we are back. Thanks for staying with us. You're tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Wednesday, July the 17th, 2024. So we've been talking about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And you cannot, if you saw the video, and I'm sure most of you have seen the video, it's very disturbing. It's not gory. It's none of those things. When you see him getting shot and he reaches for his ear, he could just as easily have been swiping away, reaching for his ear because some bug, a wasp, a hornet, a bee, whatever, was bothering him. That's what it looked like at first, other than, the gunfire that was going on. So anyway, he ducks down, the Secret Service rushes in, they protect him, off he goes. The iconic picture, the picture that you will always remember this by. And that is Donald Trump being led off the stage, surrounded by Secret Service, bloody face and ear from the bullet wound, and him with his fist in the air, and a beautiful, pristine blue sky background, and the American flag there. That, ladies and gentlemen, that's the picture of the event. That's the picture of the campaign. I'm sure that you're going to see this over and over and over again over the next 2 months. So, look, thank God that President Trump is safe. He was not severely wounded. Unfortunately, can't let the occasion pass without observing that one individual, in the course of protecting his family from gunfire, was himself shot and died, and two other individuals were also wounded in the attack. And the shooter himself, the would-be assassin himself, was also shot by Secret Service. So that's sort of the rest of the story, if I could use that terminology. No disrespect to Paul Harvey. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. And I think I would probably be saying the same thing and, having a sense of relief if it had been, the roles had been reversed and it was President Biden who was almost assassinated. There's really no place for this kind of silliness. And to be perfectly honest with you, the temperature of the rhetoric. I mean, I'm a bit of a history buff when it comes to American history, and I'm perfectly aware that nobody should be shocked by the vehemence and even the violent language that's been deployed here in the course of this campaign so far. The accusations that, Trump's going to be a dictator. And it's not unusual for this kind of stuff to go on. It may be that this is the worst it's been in my personal experience that I've ever observed personally, but historically, this is nothing really new in the United States. There is a certain amount of baked in potential for violence, and we've seen a lot of violence in the United States. 4 out of 46 presidents of the United States have been assassinated. Just think about that. And when I say 46 presidents, remember a lot of those presidents served more than one term. So 10% ballpark of American presidents have been assassinated. And those who were not assassinated, many of them had attempts made on their lives, and in many cases, multiple attempts. So there is an element, and I don't know how to explain it, but there is an element of violence or threat of violence that seems to be part of the American political landscape. But it's precisely because of that I think that the leaders have to set a better example. When you hear Joe Biden and the Democrats and their followers, who in many cases don't know better, when you hear them referring to Donald Trump as wanting to be a dictator, of planning to destroy American democracy, being on par with Hitler. I mean, they're absurd, they're dangerous, they're highly irresponsible. Let alone the fact that there's no truth to any of them. Not one speck, not one iota of truth to any of these claims. They're just totally invented. And the idea being, we're going to generate so much fear or so much hate of Donald Trump that people are just going to vote against him because they're just afraid of him. I mean, that has been the Democratic plan, I think. Certainly that's what the evidence seems to point to. But this is what happens. Now, I'm not drawing a line between the rhetoric and the false accusations and the actions of this ill-informed, deranged, possibly young man. I don't know what his motives were. None of us know at this point in time. But that's beside the point. We don't have to know definitively that the irresponsible rhetoric that has been flying back and forth, primarily coming from the Democrats, we don't have to have a direct cause and effect here between that and the attempted assassination this past Saturday of President Trump in order to say enough. And I have to tell you, I'm just astonished. by there's no other way I could express it. The blatant lying that has come from President Biden on this particular issue. I mean, I saw him interviewed the other night, and where he said, I don't engage in this kind of rhetoric. Well, of course you do. How many times have we heard you say that Donald Trump is going to be a dictator, that he wants to destroy American democracy? It's very troubling that anybody could lie so blatantly and get away with it. The President of the United States. And, this isn't a partisan thing. Sure, I'm a conservative. But if you've listened to my podcast for any length of time, you know that I'm not a big Donald Trump fan. Lots of things I like about him, about his policies. Yeah, okay, I like the idea that he's a fighter. I mean, sure. But I don't think he's a very good role model. And, I think I wish I had that he would be acting a little bit more presidential. I think to myself, would I want my children or my grandchildren now to emulate Donald Trump's behavior? Sometimes it to me it's problematic. That's me. It doesn't mean he's not qualified for office or anything like that. My point is that I'm not coming to this from a partisan point of view. I'm not saying Donald Trump is a saint and Joe Biden is the devil incarnate. But I am saying, ladies and gentlemen, I actually haven't heard Donald Trump in an outright lie. Oh, okay. Maybe he exaggerates certain things, like the size of a crowd. That seems to have been an issue at some point in time. Okay. And he's a bit bombastic. He does a great job, and it's he might say it's the greatest job that's ever been done on this particular topic. Okay. That kind of exaggeration I can forgive. And if Joe Biden was engaged in that kind of rhetoric, and he has from time to time, I could forgive that also. But the blatant lying, on stuff that we know is a lie, that's easily verifiable. I don't know. I just don't understand. Anyway, as I said already, thank God that Donald Trump was not severely injured. I saw him at the Republican National Convention yesterday. I'm watching on YouTube. I'm not actually there. He looked subdued. There was something about him, his demeanor, that struck me. He's going to be speaking tomorrow night, Thursday night at the convention. So we'll see what he has to say. Hopefully he will not just tone his own rhetoric down, but, make peace. Now, I know everybody out there, lots of people out there don't agree with me. They want a fighter, and you can fight. You can fight without being ugly about it and being a poor role model. As Winston Churchill once said, when he was criticized for being excessively polite and following protocol, when informing the Japanese ambassador that the British United Kingdom was declaring war on them, he was excessively polite in his note, and he was criticized for it. His response was, listen, when you have to kill somebody, it really makes no difference. It doesn't, where's the harm in being polite while you're doing it? Or words to that effect. I probably badly mangled the quote, but you get the picture. Look, we're going to go for our next break, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the situation with the Democratic Party and their leader, President Joe Biden. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Is that like swinging music? It just, every time I hear that tune, it just puts me in a good mood. I don't know what it is. That's just me, I guess. I just find it to be a catchy, sort of hip tune. Can I use that term? Is that a term that people use these days? Hip? Anyway, I don't know. You are tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Wednesday, July the 17th, 2024, and I am your host, Joseph Ben-Ami, just in case you hadn't guessed that yourself. Okay, well, we've been talking about politics in the United States, and we're going to stay on that topic, but I want to shift my attention now from the events in Pennsylvania this past weekend and the current situation that the Democratic Party federally in the United States finds itself in with its leader, the current sitting president of the United States, Joe Biden. I was in Washington last week for the week. That's why I didn't have a podcast. I was attending a conference and several meetings. And one of the presenters at the conference that I was attending was a fellow by the name of Stephen Miller. Steve Miller was an advisor to Donald Trump when Donald Trump was the sitting president. He worked at the White House. And he was speaking to a group of conservative thinkers and activists, organizers, an international group. It wasn't an American group. There were a lot of Americans there, don't get me wrong, but it was an international group. So I was there. I was participating in some of these meetings, and when Steve Miller got up at the podium and started talking gave a speech And the theme of his speech was that the mainstream media and that the Democratic Party had hidden the infirmities of Joe Biden, his mental, his cognitive, his physical diminishment, and that this was a terrible scandal. And he kept coming back to it, how they'd hidden this, and now, of course, it was all exposed because of President Biden's performance in the debate with President Trump. And I have to tell you, I listened to his presentation, and then I talked to a few people afterwards, and my response was this: hidden from who? Who hid this? I certainly knew about this. We in Canada could see, if you pay attention to Joe Biden, his clear mental decline and physical decline. What we saw in the debate wasn't new. And I suspect it's the same thing for most Americans. Now, there's this thing of confirmation bias, and, there's probably a reverse of confirmation bias, and that is you tend to see the things that interest you the most when you're looking at things. And, maybe you tend to deceive yourself. So if you're a Joe Biden fan, if you hate Donald Trump, then when you see Joe Biden, maybe you fool yourself into thinking, it's not so bad. Maybe there's a psychological thing here, but the point I'm making is it's been obvious to many of us, including many in the United States, and it had to have been obvious. This is the main point. The main point is that Joe Biden's condition had to have been obvious to senior members of the Democratic Party, the Democratic establishment, for some time. This didn't just pop up. There are people that work with him in his cabinet day in and day out, staff at the White House. Joe Biden does meetings with senior Democratic organizers. He does the odd fundraiser from time to time. There is no possibility whatsoever, in my mind anyway, that senior members of the Democratic Party didn't know. They had to have known. And so forget about whether or not they were trying to hide it from the rest of the country. Forget about whether or not Steve Miller is right that they were perpetrating a fraud on the country and on frankly, everybody else around the world. Forget all of that for a moment. They themselves had to have known. And for whatever reason, they didn't do anything about it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what astonishes me. What astonishes me is not that they tried to hide it. I don't think they did a very good job of hiding it, but let's say that was their objective, and let's say that they implemented policies and procedures in order to keep that information away from the general public. Let's take that as a starting point. Okay, fine. But they had to have known themselves. And that's where this whole theory breaks down. Because how do you let the situation get to the point that it has gotten? How do you let this go on like this? You know the consequences. You know the dangers involved in turning a blind eye to a president who is frankly not able to exercise the responsibilities of office. And I'm speaking now, I remember now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a Canadian. I'm not an American. I don't have a dog in this hunt. Americans have the right and the responsibility to elect their president. I'm just looking. Take it from me as an outsider looking in. It's obvious to me that this man cannot discharge the duties of President of the United States. It is obvious to me, it's obvious to many of us outside of the country, including the enemies of the United States. Do not dismiss the significance of that. And yet you're prepared to go on with this with no plan to deal with it. You're prepared to put him out to run against Donald Trump. I cannot wrap my mind around this. And I talk to many people in Washington on both sides of the political spectrum. And I've not heard, the only answer that even came close to providing some kind of an explanation was that the Democratic establishment knows that as bad as things are with Joe Biden right now, they would be equally bad, if not worse, if Kamala Harris were to become the president. That they don't have confidence that she could discharge the duties of the office. Now, how could Kamala Harris become president? Well, if Joe Biden would have to resign because of his incapacities, then Kamala Harris would be the next in line to be president. There wouldn't be an election. And that's there is a kernel of, I don't know about truth, but there is a kernel of plausibility in that explanation. But in my mind, where it falls down is this, okay? Joe Biden doesn't have to be the candidate. You knew things were bad for him, and yet you ran him in the primary, essentially a closed primary. So he could still be the president, but not running again for office. And you could have had an open primary, and you'd have a young person, a different person, and it might even be Kamala Harris. She would be perfectly capable of running for the nomination for the Democratic Party. So once again, we come back to the same question. How do you let it get this far? You could have put a stop to this, I don't know, 10 months ago, 6 months ago. But instead, we continue on this road. And now I'm not hearing anybody in the Democratic Party. And this is very troubling too, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not hearing anybody in the Democratic Party talking about the good of the country. I'm not hearing anybody in the Democratic Party saying, we don't think that Joe Biden, our candidate, can properly discharge the responsibilities of President of the United States. I'm not hearing anybody talk that way. All I'm hearing is, we don't think he can win the next election. We don't think he can beat Donald Trump. Therefore, he can't be the candidate. Am I the only person that's troubled by that? Again, I'm a Canadian, so I don't have a dog in the hunt, but I'm not a completely disinterested bystander. I live in the international community where American strength and American stability counts. And whether it's a Republican in the White House or a Democrat or an independent or whatever their political party, whatever their political persuasion, they have to be competent, they have to be lucid, they have to be capable, both physically and mentally, of discharging their responsibilities. Otherwise the world is less safe. And some things they just I can't explain, and I cannot wrap my mind around it. And this is one of them. How does the Democratic Party let things get this bad? And even now that they're this bad, again, I'm not hearing any of them talk about the office of president. I'm not hearing anybody talking about the United States of America when it comes to this subject. What I'm hearing people talk about are the elections. We can't win with Joe Biden. That's what I'm hearing. I think it's terrible. Frankly, I think it's shameful. And maybe I don't have the right to make that observation as a Canadian. But hey, you know, when you treat the most powerful office in the world with such disdain, you are endangering the safety of everybody in the world. That is an awesome responsibility. And it's one that I regret to say I don't think that the Democrats in the United States take as seriously as they ought to. We're running a bit over time. We're going to go for our final break of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. And welcome back to the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. I am your host, Joseph Ben-Ami, and it is Wednesday, July the 17th, 2024. We have been talking about everything that's been going on in the United States of America and the absolute turmoil, the anarchy almost, that is plaguing the presidential race at this point in time. Attempted assassination, a sitting president who is frankly mentally and physically, shall I be blunt and say incompetent? You know, apart from policy differences or concerns that I or any conservatives might have for the direction that the country of the United States is going, from purely a policy point of view, it's clear that the sitting president does not have the capacity to discharge the responsibility of President of the United States. That's not just bad for America, it's bad for the world. And that's why people like me outside of the country you know, we're saying what we're saying. We're raising some alarm bells. I've never seen it this bad. And I can't help, I know I'm repeating myself, but I just cannot wrap my mind around how it is that the leadership of the Democratic Party in the United States has allowed the situation to get to the point where it is. I don't care how much you don't like Donald Trump. You have ample opportunity to ensure that there's somebody that is running against him that is together. This is not binary. You didn't have a choice. I mean, no, sorry, let me rephrase that. You did have a choice. You chose to stay with Joe Biden. I just can't see the justification for that, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to be a responsible leader, a responsible steward of the public interest in the United States, I just don't see it. But that's just me, I guess. We're going to see what's going to happen. As I said, the Republican National Congress is going on as we speak. If you're listening to this live, I believe that the nominee for vice president will be speaking at 9 p.m. Eastern time, which is just when this show ends. So I think that's the time that he's slated to speak. So that'll be interesting. Donald Trump himself is going to be speaking tomorrow night. Can't wait to hear that. And then the Democratic National Congress's convention is going to be on in a few weeks' time as well. And that story is not on. By the way, let me dangle this out, a little bit of a teaser, okay? I'm not going to give you details because I don't know how true this is, but my understanding, I've heard from some of my sources that there is a scandal involving Joe Biden and his family that's going to break in the next couple of weeks, that, you know, unless he steps down. So I don't know how true that is, and I don't want to feed any speculation except to say that I had heard that there was this scandal. I have some details of it, but there's no way that I could possibly check, so I'm not going to go further than what I've said. All I can say at this stage is stay tuned. So, look, here we are. We've been talking about the situation in the United States. How could we possibly let the occasion pass without saying a few words about the political turmoil that the United Kingdom has just come through? An election that has not seen the Tories, the Conservative Party, wiped out, but deeply diminished in terms of its seat total in the British Parliament, this is a political organization that is in search of its soul. It's in search of a soul, and it's going to be very interesting to see how things transpire in the UK moving forward. We didn't get a chance to talk about other developments on the continent. European continent, in the EU. As you know, I think the last time we spoke, we were waiting for French elections, the second round of French elections. The first round was won by Marine Le Pen party and the coalition she leads, which is more or less right-wing populist. The runoff looked like that they might win an outright majority in the runoffs in the second round of voting, but the left-wing parties pulled together to unify themselves, and as a consequence of that, they won the elections. But the largest party is still the party of Le Pen, and right now the Prime Minister just resigned. Not today, but I believe yesterday. So in France, they're having a lot of trouble now forming a government. Now, if you follow French politics, you're probably saying, and what's new? It's a fair question. French politics is very strange that way. But you see that there's this trend in Europe of the population basically saying we've had it with the massive bureaucratic state and bureaucratic politicians. They've just had it. And so you've seen this wave of moving towards grassroots populist right-wing political parties in elections in individual countries, and we saw it in the European elections as well, for the elections for the European Parliament. Now, what happened in the UK, people are looking at this and say, look at the massive majority that the Labour Party won, over 400 seats in the British Parliament. But my advice is that you just don't let yourself be fooled by that result. The Labour Party won those seats on the back of somewhere around 34% popular vote. So it wasn't a ringing endorsement. It's just the idiosyncrasies that are embedded, inherent in the British political system, in the electoral system. So the Reform Party, which is a right-wing populist party, won a lot of votes. Didn't translate into actual seats. I think they won 4 seats in the Parliament. The Tories, the Conservatives, are still over 100 seats, but they were down in Reform Party territory in terms of vote total, so there's a lot of things that lead to the seat distribution being the way it is. The important takeaway here is that you shouldn't be looking at the seat total and the size of the majority of seats that the Labour Party has won. You shouldn't be interpreting that as the UK voters bucking the trend, if you will, that has been apparent in recent elections on the continent. I would say on the contrary, I think that you still see a lot of that manifest in the UK election. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to really delve into it very much. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time here, ladies and gentlemen. We have been, it's been an interesting show tonight, and I am looking forward to further developments, certainly getting more answers that make sense about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I can't wait to hear what he has to say tomorrow night at the Republican National Convention. So we'll get into all of that next week, ladies and gentlemen. In the meantime, check out the website, www.josephbenami.com, all one word without the hyphen. While you're there, make sure that you sign up to join our email list. It's free. We don't share your email or contact information with anyone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will catch you next week then here on the Joseph Benamy Show. Until then, God bless, and do not drink the Kool-Aid.